It started with sirens. Again. I was lying back, floating peacefully in my own backyard pool, when out of nowhere, a pair of squad cars rolled up like I'd just committed a felony. My crime? Floating. You'd think I was running some black market. Submarine operation, the way HOA Karen called it in. But if she thought I'd be intimidated, she had another thing coming. Because what I did next? Let's just say she'll think twice before dialing 911 over water again. It was supposed to. Be a calm afternoon. Just me, the sun overhead, and the sound of water gently lapping against the sides of my pool. After a long week of meetings and paperwork, I was finally taking a break the way I like it. No music, no phone, just floating in peace. But peace, it turns out, is something HOA Karen can't stand, because within 20 minutes of me stepping into my own pool, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. I thought maybe there had been an accident nearby. But when the cruiser slowed and stopped directly in front of my house, I stood up, squinting toward the flashing lights. 2 officers got out, hands casually resting on their belts, scanning my backyard like they were looking for a fugitive. That's when I realized someone had called them on me. I wrapped a towel around my waist, walked to the gate, and asked calmly, "Officers, everything okay?" One of them raised a brow. "Sir, we got a call about suspicious behavior in your backyard pool. Possible distress, maybe intoxication. Mind if we check it out?" That's when Karen's voice cut in from across the fence. "Yes, officers. Thank you for responding so quickly. I was watching from my kitchen window. He was just floating there for too long, not moving. It looked creepy." She crossed, her arms like she had just caught a criminal in the act of breathing. The younger cop glanced at me, clearly trying not to laugh. "Were you floating?" I blinked. "Yes. That's what people do in pools." Karen wasn't done. "He didn't even flinch when a bird landed nearby. What if he passed out? Or worse, what if he was trying to lure kids to the fence?" That's when it hit me. She wasn't just annoyed. I was being set up. This wasn't about safety. This was personal. I turned to the officers. "She's the head of the HOA. She's been making up complaints for weeks now. I've got it all. Documented, letters about my grass being too green, a complaint about my patio lights being too festive, and now she's calling 911 over pool floating?" The older officer nodded slowly. "Mind if we take a look around? Just a routine check." I stepped aside and let them in. They walked the perimeter, saw the clean pool, the empty backyard, my towel and sunscreen neatly by the lounger. There was nothing that even remotely looked out of the ordinary. Karen kept yapping from the other side of the fence. "He's been weird since he moved in, always alone. That pool's probably full of chemicals and bacteria. Who floats? Like that for 30 minutes straight?" I raised my phone and started recording. Her voice carried easily over the wood panels. The officers heard it too. One of them muttered, "She seems a little intense." That was putting it mildly. When they wrapped up their inspection, they apologized for the inconvenience and told me I wasn't in any trouble. "Sorry about the confusion," the younger one said. "You're just enjoying your pool." Karen stormed off in a huff, but I knew this wasn't over. Back inside, I sat on my laptop and pulled up the email chain I'd been keeping. Every letter she sent, every complaint filed, every ridiculous notice she tried to push through the HOA board. There were at least a dozen entries, ranging from noise complaints that never happened to accusations that I'd installed unauthorized pool tile. Each time I had replied professionally, supplying photos, timestamps, and neighbor statements, but now it was escalating. This wasn't just a power trip. Karen was trying to create a record, one that made me look like a public nuisance. One she could use to try to strip me of my rights as a homeowner. Her goal was clear: get me to snap or get me out. But why? What I didn't know then, but would uncover soon, was that Karen had plans for the neighborhood. Big plans. And I was standing directly in her way. Back in the present, I sat by my pool again. The sun was setting, and I looked out at the still water. That pool wasn't just a luxury for me. It was a symbol of peace, of freedom, of the simple joy of owning a home where you can relax without being hounded by a clipboard tyrant. But now, that peace had been disturbed. I wasn't about to roll over and let it keep happening. If Karen wanted a war over floating, then I was about to make this the weirdest, most unforgettable HOA battle she'd ever regret starting. The next morning, I found a folded envelope shoved awkwardly in my mailbox. No postage, no return address, just urgent HOA violation notice. In bold red print across the front. I didn't need to open it to know who was behind it. But I opened it anyway. Inside was a full-page citation from the HOA, claiming that my pool failed to meet updated safety standards and posed a potential hazard to the community. They referenced unauthorized structural modifications, which I hadn't made, and alleged violations of water usage ordinances, even though I used a pool cover and my system was on a timer to conserve water. It was a mix of nonsense and legalese designed to look official. But here's where it got interesting. At the bottom, the letter mentioned an upcoming HOA meeting where resolutions regarding shared recreational spaces and community usage redesign would be discussed. That was the first time I'd seen anything about shared spaces in the neighborhood. So I started digging. I pulled the last 6 months of HOA newsletters from the portal. Nothing. Not a single mention of changes to backyard use policies. Then, I checked the minutes from the last few board meetings. Buried in one-line item under future projects was a vague mention of Community Enhancement Plan Phase 2. No details, no vote notes, no attachments. I reached out to one of the quieter board members, a guy named Luis who worked as an accountant and rarely said much during meetings. We'd spoken once before about driveway repairs. This time, I caught him watering his lawn and casually asked if he knew what Phase 2 was about. He hesitated before answering. Between you and me, Karen's been pushing a proposal to build a multi-use gathering space behind the clubhouse. But she's also been talking about pool consolidations to reduce liability. I raised an eyebrow. Pool consolidations? Yeah, he said, lowering his voice. She wants to push for individual pools in the community to be shut down and replaced with one shared HOA pool near the center of the development. Says it'll cut costs and reduce risk. But your yard backs right up to the proposed site. If they can argue your pool violates enough codes, it gives them leverage to push the plan through. Now it made sense. Karen wasn't just annoyed by my floating habits. She had a full-blown agenda. And I was the final obstacle. I started connecting dots, the fake complaints, the 911 call, the sudden safety violation letter. All of it was part of a larger strategy to build a case against me, force me into non-compliance, and then use that to justify repurposing my land, or at least shut down my pool so she could spin it as a voluntary transition. She'd already done it to a couple of other neighbors under the guise of beautification efforts. One guy had to tear down his gazebo, another had to remove his hot tub. I remembered thinking those were odd calls at the time, minor infractions that seemed to get escalated way too fast. But the real bombshell came when I talked to Maya, the widow who lived 2 streets over. She'd had a pool for over 20 years, small but perfectly maintained. 2 months ago, she quietly drained it and covered it with a deck. At the time, everyone assumed she just didn't want the upkeep. But when I asked her why, she sighed and looked around before saying, Karen showed up with papers, said if I didn't shut it down, she'd cite me for fence violations and threatened to report my house for being out of code with city bylaws. Said it was for safety and unity. I didn't want trouble, so I gave in. That's when I knew. Karen wasn't just flexing her power, she was actively trying to control property through intimidation, and I wasn't about to be her next trophy. Printed out every complaint she had filed against me, including the latest one. I cross-referenced dates, collected timestamps from my pool cam footage, and even started gathering witness statements from neighbors who had seen or heard her overstep. I also reached out to a friend of mine who happened to be a zoning officer with the city. I asked him about these so-called safety code violations. After a quick scan, he told me my pool was compliant and had passed every inspection on file. "She's either misinterpreting the code or hoping you don't know your rights," he said. I did know my rights. And now I had something Karen wasn't expecting. A growing list of allies, a mountain of evidence, and a clear motive behind her scheme. She wanted my pool gone. But what she didn't realize was that by pushing so hard, she'd just turned a peaceful neighbor into her worst nightmare. Someone who wasn't just going to push back, but someone who would expose the entire plan before it had a chance to take root. This wasn't about a pool anymore. This was about setting an example. And I was just getting started. Karen wanted drama. She got it. I decided I wouldn't raise my voice, argue, or file a counter-complaint. That's her game. Mine is smarter, more surgical, so I gotta work. I ordered a realistic-looking black dorsal shark fin online, the kind of thing you'd see in a cheesy beach horror movie, except this wasn't the ocean, it was my backyard pool. I rigged it up with some clear fishing line and attached it to a lightweight harness I could strap to my shoulders. When I floated, the fin stayed upright just enough to poke out of the water. It looked unnervingly real from the fence line. That weekend, when the sun was high and Karen's blinds were cracked open like usual, I put my plan in motion. I waited until I knew she was watching. How? Because Karen doesn't just peek, she monitors. Her blinds move in little jolts, just wide enough for her to press her face against. It's like she believes her house is NORAD, and my pool is a threat to national security. I eased into the water, back first, slow as a ripple. I let the fin glide up, casting a long, dark shadow on the turquoise surface. Boom! I heard it through the hedge, a muffled shriek, the unmistakable clatter of her phone hitting the windowsill. And not even 5 minutes later, sirens. She'd done it again. Except this time, Karen wasn't calling about a man suspiciously floating. No, she had leveled up. She told dispatch there was a large, possibly dangerous aquatic animal in a private residential pool. You can't make this stuff up. Within moments, a patrol car rolled up, followed by an animal control unit. 2 uniformed officers, confused as hell, came around the side gate and stopped cold. One looked at the other like, "Is this really happening?" I stayed floating, calm, serene, fin up. They asked me to exit the pool and explain. I did, slowly, without removing the fin, which made it even better. One officer actually chuckled when he saw it up close. The other shook his head and muttered, "I can't believe I'm standing here for a fake shark complaint." Then Karen stormed out in full hysteria mode, robe on, hair half done, phone still clutched in her trembling hand. She demanded they cite me for endangering the neighborhood, said her grandchildren might have been scarred for life. She ranted about terroristic pranks and psychological trauma. But here's the thing, nothing I did was illegal. No one was trespassing. No one was hurt. No noise complaints. No indecent exposure. Just a guy peacefully floating in his pool, wearing a plastic shark fin. A prank, maybe, but a clever one. The officers said they couldn't enforce anything. They advised Karen to stop calling unless there was a real emergency. She lost it. She screamed at the cops, called me mentally unstable, and declared she'd take this to the HOA board, the mayor, and the governor if she had to. One officer calmly wrote down the incident, asked Karen to lower her voice, and walked away. But by then, the real show had already started. You see, a neighbor had filmed the entire thing from their upstairs balcony, Karen screaming about sharks. In a suburban pool, the cop laughing, me standing there with the fin still strapped to my back. It hit local Facebook groups within hours. By that night, it had over 50,000 views on TikTok. Someone dubbed the Jaws theme under it. Others added captions like, "When HOA Karen meets SeaWorld." She became a meme. A viral sensation, and oh, she hated it. The next day, Karen called. An emergency HOA meeting to address the growing culture of mockery and neighborhood defiance. But by now the board was split. Half of them saw her as an embarrassment. The other half, secretly entertained. Luis, the quiet board member, shot me a text. "She's unraveling. Keep swimming." The best part? This wasn't just a prank. It was a power move. I didn't scream. I didn't file a single complaint. I let her hang herself with her own rope, armed only with paranoia and pride. And now? The community had seen her for who she really was. Not a guardian of order, not a concerned neighbor, just a control freak with too much time and not enough sense to know when to quit. But I wasn't done. Because if Karen wanted to play games, she needed to know there are levels to this. And the shark fin? That was just my opening move. Karen doesn't back off when she's embarrassed. She digs in deeper. The viral shark fin incident only lit a fuse under her ego, and instead of lying low and letting things cool off, she went nuclear. Within 2 days, a printed flyer showed up on every doorstep in the neighborhood, inviting residents to a neighborhood safety emergency session. The heading was bold, red, and dramatic. Pool pranks or public threats. Beneath it, a blurry photo of me floating in my pool with the shark fin, cropped in a way that made it look ominous. I knew she was about to attempt damage control. She couldn't handle the narrative turning against her. At the so-called safety meeting, Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse like she was delivering a State of the Union address. She had a projector, a laptop, and a tone that could sour milk. Her presentation started with cherry-picked clips from various home security systems, edited just enough to tell the story she wanted. There was a shot of kids near the pool area from weeks ago, followed by a sudden cut to me floating with the shark fin. Completely different times, different days. But she tried to present it as if I was stalking children or trying to frighten the youth. I could see the shift in the room. Some neighbors looked confused, others uncomfortable. But one thing was clear. She had overplayed her hand. Then she dropped her so-called bombshell. She claimed she had hired a certified pool safety inspector to assess whether my pool was a danger to the community. She even passed around a printed report supposedly filed by this inspector, a 1-page document with vague claims about visual hazards and potential for public panic. It was clearly homemade. That's when I stood up. I calmly explained that the footage was edited and deliberately misleading. I pointed out the inconsistencies in the shadows, weather, and timestamps. But I didn't stop there. I'd come prepared. I handed out flash drives to every board member and played my own security footage on the big screen. Full, uncut, time-stamped clips showing exactly what happened that day. Me floating peacefully, Karen shouting from her window, and the police arriving, confused and apologetic. It wasn't just clear. It was airtight. Murmurs spread across the room. Some people chuckled, others gave me nods, and Karen, her face turned crimson. But the final nail wasn't from me. It was from Diane, one of the quieter HOA members, a retired CPA who kept to herself but clearly had had enough. She stood up and asked Karen directly, "Which budget line item did you use to pay this inspector?" Karen hesitated. "It came from discretionary funds allocated to emergency community concerns." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I just checked last month's statements. There's no transaction for any inspector, no vendor name, no invoice, nothing." The room went silent. Diane continued, cool and sharp. "And I called the state certification board this morning. There's no licensed pool inspector in this county under the name you listed in your report, so either someone is committing fraud or we've got a serious misuse of HOA funds on our hands." Karen stammered, trying to pivot, claiming she must have been misled by the inspector. But the damage was done. The board members began whispering. Someone pulled out a phone and took a photo of the bogus report. Diane announced she'd be recommending a formal audit of HOA expenditures for the past year. Karen's carefully controlled illusion was collapsing in real time. Her allies on the board suddenly found excuses to stay neutral. Her tone shifted, from righteous to pleading. She insisted it was all for the good of the neighborhood, but no one was buying it. Her attempt to paint me as a menace had not only failed, it exposed her as someone willing to lie, manipulate, and possibly embezzle just to save face. By the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. The board would investigate her actions, suspend any independent HOA safety initiatives, and place restrictions on Karen's communication to the neighborhood listserv. She left the room in silence, her heels clacking against the tile like distant gunshots. The woman who once saw herself as the enforcer of order had now become the subject of an internal review. And the neighborhood? They didn't just see me as the guy with the shark fin anymore. They saw me as the guy who held the line, stayed calm, and brought truth to the surface. Karen thought she could win by force, but her real mistake was thinking no one would push back. And now that she was finally on the defensive, I knew exactly how this was going to end. Because this wasn't just a petty feud anymore. This was justice. One prank, one lie, and one exposed fraud at a time. The aftermath of Karen's implosion didn't just ripple through the HOA, it was a tidal wave that reshaped everything. The morning after the emergency meeting, I filed a formal complaint with the city's Department of Neighborhood Affairs. With the forged report, misuse of discretionary funds, and the attempted defamation against me, I wasn't just defending my pool, I was exposing systemic HOA abuse that had gone unchecked for years. And I wasn't alone anymore. 3 neighbors volunteered to sign witness affidavits. Even the HOA treasurer, who'd previously been silent, turned over emails showing Karen had pressured her to keep the expense off the books. Within 2 weeks, the city sent investigators. Not just for Karen, but for the HOA's financials. Auditors pulled files, subpoenaed communications, and conducted interviews with several residents. One city official privately told me it was the most colorful HOA case they'd seen in a decade. Karen was suspended from her position immediately, but it didn't stop there. A special HOA meeting was called to vote on her permanent removal. Over 90% of the community showed up, many who hadn't attended a single meeting in years. Turns out they just needed a reason, and Karen had given them 1 or 12. The vote wasn't even close. Karen was removed from the board, permanently barred from holding any position of leadership in the HOA. When she stormed out, she muttered something about lawyering up, but everyone had the same reaction. Let her try. With her gone, something changed in the neighborhood. People were friendlier, more relaxed. Yards that had been fined into compliance started to show life again. Flower beds, creative fences, even a few gnomes popped up in rebellion. It felt like a breath of fresh air. As for me, I decided to make a statement. I hosted a neighborhood pool party. Open invite, 0 HOA involvement. I hired a food truck, set up music, and filled the backyard with inflatable shark fins. Everyone showed up. Kids dove into the pool giggling, parents laughed over burgers, and even some former board members stopped by to apologize for not speaking up sooner. No one mentioned Karen, at least not directly. But the shark fins made it clear. We all knew who wasn't invited. That party wasn't just about fun, it was closure. A celebration of a community freed from a bully in a cardigan. The HOA itself underwent a restructuring. With Karen's exit and the city's involvement, new transparency policies were put in place. Monthly financial reports became public. A Checks and Balances Committee was formed to oversee spending. And most importantly, an addendum was added to the bylaws protecting the sanctity of private property. No board member could use community benefit as an excuse to intrude on personal spaces again. I wasn't interested in running for any leadership role. I'd had enough politics to last a lifetime. But I did accept an honorary title. Pool. Liaison. Basically, I get to approve or deny any community pool-related events. Not that anyone's daring to make a request. The shark fin legend has taken on a life of its own. Neighborhood kids even gave me a nickname, Captain Float. I wasn't mad about it. Word about the story spread beyond our block. A local news station picked it up after a neighbor posted the full saga on a community subreddit. They ran a 5-minute segment titled From Pool Float to Power Shift, How One Man Deflated a Dictator HOA. It went viral. Messages poured in from other states, people sharing their own HOA nightmares, others just saying thanks for standing up to someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her, and Karen, she moved out. Rumor has it she's relocated to a different HOA neighborhood on the other side of the county. Poor souls. But here, we've got our peace back, we've got our voice, and we've got one glorious pool where everyone is welcome, as long as they don't come barging in with fake police or forged paperwork. I learned a lot through all of it. That standing your ground doesn't mean being aggressive. It means being strategic. That humor can be sharper than anger. And that, sometimes floating in your pool with a shark fin is the loudest protest you'll ever need. We didn't just win. We transformed. And now, every time I see a neighbor wave from across the street or a kid paddle by with a toothy fin on their back, I'm reminded, when the water clears, the truth floats to the top. If you loved watching Karen get served with a cold splash of karma, just wait. There's more where that came from. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and dive into more jaw-dropping HOA takedowns every week. This is the HOA Stories, where justice isn't just served. It cannonballs in.